Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Today, we are going to have a panel discussion about accelerating medical device development using the simulation portfolio powered by Abaqus. Just to set the context, the medical device manufacturing industry is growing at an incredible pace while undergoing significant changes in terms of efficiency and scope as new technologies push the boundary of what's possible. Definitely, technology is transforming the market with features such as automated and integrated product design, simulation, and advanced 3D printing. Healthcare companies, especially med device companies, are embracing this change by creating innovative solutions that meets the intended use, but also they need to navigate the increasingly challenging regulatory environment. So in order to discuss this, how med device companies can innovate in a very efficient way while meeting all the challenges, we have in the panel today Dr. Nuno Rebelo and Dr. Stuart Wright. Nuno Rebelo received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley in 1980. For most of his professional life, he has been involved in both the software development and the industrial application of finite element methods. From 1984 to 2001, he was a member of the development staff of MARC and the Abaqus finite element course, during which he worked on many things, including contact algorithms, material modeling, and stabilization methods. From 1989 until 2018, he opened and was the director of technical sales of Simulia West Center of Excellence. In 2018, Nuno retired and he continues to do consulting work through Nuno Rebelo Associates. For more than 15 years, he's been involved with FE analysis of medical devices, and he wrote the Nitinol material model, which is widely used by many med device companies, and it's available in Abaqus. Nuno is incredibly talented and he has immense industry experience. And Nuno does not speak much publicly, so we are very happy to have Nuno as part of the panel here. Welcome, Nuno.
Well, thank you.
I also wanted to highlight that we have another doctor on our panel, Dr. Stuart Wright. Dr. Wright has been in the business of computational modeling and simulation for most of his career. He is now a specialist in the use of modeling and simulation in support of product development and validation in the life sciences industry. In addition to defining modeling and simulation-based business solutions for life sciences, Stuart works closely with customers to evaluate their simulation needs and capabilities and to develop roadmaps for leveraging simulation more effectively for now and in the future. I'm very happy to have Stuart Wright helping us with providing not only technology but also industry perspective. So welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Sumant.
All right, it's very exciting to have both of you on the panel. So let me get started. So the first question that comes to me, Stuart, is as you look at the life sciences and med device industry, what are the main trends that you see from a near-term perspective as well as a long-term perspective?
I think a trend for the 21st century that we didn't see so much of in the 20th century is more of a push towards personalization in medical devices. We've seen it in other industries, of course. I might throw out an example of an electric car seat. That's all about personalizing your comfort as you're sitting in a car and driving, or as a passenger. But we never really saw much of that in medical devices until recent years, and I think that's a very significant push, not least because the patient experience can very much dictate the quality of the outcome. I'll use an illustration of the at-home, the diabetic who administers their own insulin at home. If they're having a tough experience with the insulin injector, they're going to find it hard to be compliant with their therapy. And if they're not compliant with their therapy, then the outcome will be impaired. So I think that's going to be, it's already a near-term dynamic, and I think we're going to see it for many, many years to come, the push towards personalization of devices.
Okay.
I think there's another trend as well, though, which is a very sinister trend, and that's the one of increasing cost. It's not new. The cost of bringing a device to market has been escalating at a seemingly an uncontrolled rate for a number of years, and it continues to worsen. And somehow the curve of cost has to be inflected. We see simulation as one of the mechanisms that device companies can use to inflect the cost, and we could probably talk for hours about why it's so steep, why so much cost is associated with bringing devices to market. I'll not comment too much on that right at this moment. But then another dynamic is regulatory bodies are demonstrating much more openness for the use of simulation in evidence during regulatory submissions. For a long time, they've accepted simulation as evidence. For example, with stents and the life prediction of stents, they've accepted simulation in support of other forms of evidence. But they very much more aggressively now want to try and encourage device companies to leverage simulation more extensively. It obviously has to be done with care. It obviously has to be done in a controlled manner. But they believe, as we do, that simulation, the greater use of it, is one of those ways of inflecting that curve.
Okay, very good. I certainly agree with all the points you made, Stuart, especially the cost. It's not just with the med device industry, this is a challenge that we see with overall healthcare costs as well. So that makes a lot of sense, what you're saying. You mentioned something about regulatory compliance and verification validation. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I could talk all day on this subject, but I'll try and keep it brief. We need to look at the current paradigm first of how medical devices are being developed, and it's true for almost anything in the life sciences field, the healthcare field. The field in general is still very, very much dependent on physical testing for validation. So even in early design stages, we see a lot of bench tests. We see lots of animal tests. We see cadaver tests, which is the first time a device that interfaces intimately with a human gets to meet a human, but it's not a living human. It's a human that has passed. But so we see cadaver tests, and it's all in preparation ultimately for human clinical trials. Now, of course, this isn't true for all devices. It depends on the class of the device that's being developed. But if we're talking about classes of devices that are intimately in association with the human, then ultimately clinical trial is where the device has to be tested. And this heavy dependency on physical testing is one of the reasons that development is so expensive and can take so long. It can take 5 to 10 years to bring a new device to market, depending on the amount of innovative content. And so the trend that is starting to take place is similar to the trend that we saw in aerospace and automotive and other industries over the past 20, 25 years, where simulation has found its footing. It's proven itself capable, and it has been integrated much more into development programs throughout the development program as a surrogate for physical test, as an augmentation for physical test, and in some cases a complete replacement a physical test. So that's really what we're talking about, the ability of simulation to compress the overall cycle time, but still deliver at least as much validation and verification evidence as we would have done in the past. Indeed, I would argue we can, using simulation, we can deliver 10 times, 100 times more validation data points that are defensible than we could with a physical method.
All right. Thank you very much, Stuart. Nunom, I wanted to ask you, you have been in this industry, the life sciences and med device industry, for probably 30 plus years now, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
what are the changes that you have seen in this industry, on all the points that Stuart mentioned, as well as any kind of technology changes that you have seen during your time in this industry?
right. When I look at it, from perspective now of the user, the guy who does the simulations, you need to translate the higher objectives into the nitty-gritty of what you do day in and day out. So we have seen a tremendous improvement in the quality of the tools that we have available, and I would say that's going to continue. The environment for modeling is going to evolve naturally from stylized loads and boundary conditions into loads and boundary conditions that are derived from the living conditions where devices are going to be included. The interactions between devices and the body will have to become more complex and more detailed, and possibly interactions with other devices. This business of material models that you have, I mean, it will never be complete because it's so complex. I can see researchers and developers keep doing it, and they'll keep getting better and better material models. Now, a little bit further out, I mean, we have prototypes of that today, but it is going to become much more prevalent is more complex physics or different physics. So modeling drug diffusion or bringing in electromagnetics into the fold. And I mean, adding to the solid mechanics and fluid mechanics that are being done today. The speed and analysis that we keep having, so it's really the result, a twofold result of the speed in computing, better and better computers, and then speed in software, so we can get faster and faster analysis, will allow people to do what Stuart was mentioned. You can go from a single analysis to gazillions of analysis and start doing what-if scenarios, and then start doing combination products. Now, in the more long term, we reach what Stuart's dream here of doing optimization for populations, doing patient-specific models, and so on. Now, I'm glad you guys refer to the FDA and their efforts. I've been from day one a member of the ASME's VMV40 subcommittee. So essentially, we put out a standard for validation and verification of computations in medical devices. And the FDA has been, a very strong proponent, and they were really involved into it. And probably the standard wouldn't have come out without the FDA involvement. But what I find very interesting in that standard is that it does not prescribe anything. It just tells you how you should be thinking in terms of validating and verifying the analysis that you are doing. So it puts the weight onto the analyst. So he doesn't have a blueprint of what to do, just tells him how to think or what he should be thinking about, but it's up to the analyst to look in terms of risk, in terms of completeness, and so on. So it's great that the FDA is behind all this, because I think if you follow that, what you see in this slide that Stuart is shown, I think can be realized in not so distant future.
Okay. You made a lot of good points, Nuno, and yeah, what you mentioned is very surprising that even though that there is the regulatory compliance from FDA, you do not get the kind of the step-by-step approach, but the analyst has to kind of make up that approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going the hard way, but I think it makes a lot of sense because systems are so complex, and they can be used. You know, simulation can come in to support the decision making along the process. So if the risk of the activity it's supporting is low, then simulation can be, you know, generic, or I wouldn't want to say sloppy. But if the risk of decision is being made is high, then you have to be much more serious and much more precise in what you do, and you have to prove that you looked into all aspects of things and that your results look reasonable.
Yes, absolutely. So in what both of you have been talking about, I see a clear kind of demarcation where there are the medical device industry has been using simulation, as you both mentioned, as we all know, but we also see some near-term trends in medical device industry and some longer-term trends or kind of aspirations and ambitions that we have in terms of modeling and simulation. So as well as the technology. So I wanted to kind of start out and focus more on the near-term trends, because I think there is a lot that's been told about what is the long-term trend, and we have seen many articles on that. But I wanted to focus on what is it that medical device industry can do right now in the next few years to adopt more of the technologies that we have today, and so that they can improve their design and development process. So with that theme of near-term trends, Stuart, I wanted to get your thoughts on what kind of trends do you see in the med device industry, in the immediate future?
I think in the immediate future, with respect to the use of simulation, what's going to take place, it's already taking place and it's going to continue for a time yet, is the industry is going to follow the tenets and the principles that have been demonstrated to prove successful in aerospace and automotive. And Nuno already alluded to this. He talked about the accuracy of simulation, the dependability, the defensibility of results. And accomplishing that is a journey. It requires a systematic development of capability in simulation that spans all the way from simulation that is good for giving directional decision support to simulation that is predictive enough to be done instead of a physical test. It's reliable, it's accurate, it's of known defensibility and reliability. And we're going to see customers more systematically, I think, addressing their portfolio of simulation capabilities and asking themselves, okay, what do we need as a core capability, and what capability do we have what level of capability maturity do we have in those cores, and what do we have to do to make them effective? And for me, effective means the right level of accuracy and fidelity with the right amount of dependability. Nuno also alluded to the fact that in some cases, he used the word sloppy, and I'm with you, Nuno. It's a good word. It doesn't sound like a very professional word, but you can get away with being rough and ready, back of the napkin simulation in some stages of design, which means you can get away with lower capability maturity levels. In other areas, especially when you get close to using simulation in evidence, you need to be much more vigorous about how the simulation is being enabled, enacted, and recorded and managed and placed in front of the FDA so it is defensible evidence. So I know I used a lot of words there, but I think the near term is going to be more of a focus on simulation as an important discipline and the evolution in a very disciplined manner of the capabilities that bring value to an organization.
Okay, very, very good, Stuart. That is very clear. As you were talking, Stuart, I was also thinking from a near-term trend perspective. You talked about simulation, and even Nuno talked about kind of the advancements in simulation technology. If we take one level higher, more in terms of what are the products that you see in the med device industry that you would characterize as more of a near-term trend?
So simulation obviously has application across the medical devices spectrum, and it is a fairly complex spectrum. But I think where it has the potential to have some very profound impact, and certainly when we talk about regulatory impact and provision of additional forms of evidence in addition to physical testing or in lieu of physical testing, we need to be looking at where devices interface closely with the human being. There's a number of areas. We could be talking about implants, or we could be talking about things like inhalers or injectors of various kinds, or we could be talking about something like combination products, which is a very interesting area where a drug is used in combination with an actual physical device. That's an area that is seeing a very large amount of growth, and it's a device, it's an area where we see a lot of home usage. So we all know that asthmatics use inhalers, and we all know that diabetics tend to deliver their own insulin, and both of these conditions utilize combination products.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we talked about combination products. So we talked about the drug-filled injectors. I am also kind of intrigued by one thing that Stuart had mentioned earlier about drug-eluting stents. That's probably another example of what a combination product is. Correct, Stuart?
Yes,
your
yes.
thoughts about what's happening in the world of stents.
Well, since I'm quoting numbers, let me start by giving you a few numbers for stents. Let's talk about coronary stents. So stents that open blood flow back up in arteries on the heart that are stenotic. It means they're partially blocked by a plaque. And when an artery gets blocked, the heart struggles to perform like it should. In fact, parts of the heart can die when they're starved of blood. So there's about 2 million people per year get at least one coronary stent put in. But very often multiples are put in one trip to the surgery. It's currently a market worth about $9 billion, estimated to be worth about $16 billion by 2025. and there's lots of room for performance improvement, not just in the mechanism of the stent's function, the way it interacts with an arterial wall and with the plaque to open up the lumen to blood flow, but also the potential for augmenting a stent's functionality by surface treatments, which certainly can include and do include surface treatments of drugs. Let me tell you a little bit about the market space as well. There's about 8 big players in stent engineering, but there's 40 or thereabouts overall around the world. So there's quite a number of players. There's lots of small companies vying for niches and special applications. And it's hard for them because they lack experience and a recognized name, but they can benefit from the absence of legacy attitudes and infrastructure, which can counter their lack of a name because it can make development a little less arduous for them than it is for the big players. That might seem counterintuitive since big players have so much experience, but the smaller players come with a lot less baggage. And so sometimes for them, development can be a little easier.
Okay, okay. Very interesting. Nuno, I've known you working in the world of stents for many, many years. In a way, I would almost consider you as a godfather in the world of stents, modeling and simulating stents. What do you think are some of the challenges that a designer of stents goes through, and what do they need to watch out for? Any thoughts on that topic?
Sure. Well, I should say under the designer or the analyst perspective, actually stents is just one example of a device that follows a very similar pattern. To give you some examples, so these would be devices that require very similar set of simulation capabilities. So beyond the stents proper, we will be talking, for instance, of artificial heart valve frames or aneurysm devices, both in the aorta and in the brain. And actually, these devices have the additional complication that they come together with some kind of cloth around them. We're talking about filters and so on. So these are all devices that tend to be manufactured in the same way and deployed in the same way, and so on. Now, you can look at them and they can be either balloon expandable, or in which case they are made of a traditional elastoplastic material, or they can be self-expanding, in which case they are made out of a superelastic material such as Nitinol. Although there are some stents and devices that are braided, the majority of them are laser cut. And the actually interesting aspect of a laser cut device is that there are no CAD drawings for these devices. I mean, you would expect a manufacturer, okay, I developed this, so I should have the CAD drawing. And if I'm an analyst, give me the CAD drawing and I'll apply the loads and see how it behaves. Well, there is no such thing. All it exists is the 2D drawing of the laser cutting path. So if you want to do an analysis, a proper analysis, you really need to simulate the manufacturing process until you get the final geometry, which is typically the result of you start with a tube that gets cut, you expand it multiple times until you reach the size that you want. And that's after simulating all that, that's going to give you the initial point for your in-service analysis. Now, the benchtop test simulations are quite common. Okay, So things become much more difficult when you want to reproduce realistic live loads. Okay. A simple pulsatile load is often not enough. Okay. You think even a coronary stent, where the main load is the pulsatile load due to the variation in blood pressure. But now if you were to look and put it inside the coronary artery, and if you model the heart next to it and the heart beating, that produces an incredible amount of additional motion and loading into the stent that just a very simple benchtop heartbeat would not be able to capture. Okay. So we actually, I believe we have an example here of inserting a valve frame into a beating heart. And the reason or what enables that, allows us to be able to do this, is the living heart human model that Simulia has. So it is a complete mechanical reproduction of a beating heart. And we can come to its description later on or at the end of this, so that I don't go off into tangents.
That is fine. It's completely related. Yes, I agree.
So not only the realistic live loads are important, but also it's quite important to model the delivery systems for these stents, because they're typically inserted in the leg or in the groin. They are inside a catheter, and that thing winds itself through the arterial system all the way to the appropriate artery where you want to deliver it, and then you let go and let it live in place. But it could very well be, and sometimes it is, that the worst load that the device sees is while it's being inserted into the body. Okay, so it's very important to be able to model the delivery system too. Now, once you have realistic simulations possible, then you can address a little bit the uncertainty, because there is a lot of uncertainty in the loading, but there is uncertainty in the manufacturing process, and there is uncertainty in the material properties. Okay, so it's important for you to have access to a collection of simulation tools and procedures that make it easy for the designers to do what-if scenarios and be able to optimize their designs. So fortunately, Simulia offers a lot of these workflows, and they are typically driven by eyesight, which will simplify all this. And eventually, because we are, well, I don't work for the company anymore, so the company is working on putting these workflows into 3D experience platform. Now, another aspect of stent design is the resistance to fatigue, because you would not like it to break. And you may say, well, do they break? They actually do. And in the past, people don't do that anymore because they figured it out. You know, the original cardiovascular stents that were produced, and they were designed for the beating heart. Doctors didn't take long to pick them up and insert them into leg arteries. And of course, legs bend, so the loads are much higher, and these stents would break within 3 months or so of being put in place. So the people woke up, maybe we need to design special stents for different applications. So when it comes to fatigue, the number of cycles really point to infinite life requirements. The pulsatile loading requires 400 million cycles. If the stent loading is driven by breathing, for instance, if you put a renal stent, if you apply a renal stent, then the load controlling is the breathing. So we're talking there about 100 million cycles. Or if you put a stent in the leg, has to survive maybe 10 million cycles or so. So all of these are very close to infinite life. You look at the Wohler curve, it's in the flat part to the right. So fatigue processes for elastoplastic materials are well understood, and durability can be determined. So some of these stents are made of stainless steel or cobalt chromium alloys and so on. So fatigue is quite well defined there. But in the case of nitinol, it's still a work in progress. It's accepted that fatigue should be done based on strains and not on stresses. And there are reasonable methods to deal with mean and alternating loading, mean and alternating strains that device sees. Now, the issue of triaxiality is still being sorted out, has not been completely settled yet. And recently, FESAFE has created a model for nitinol which incorporates most of what is known today. But again, the caveat there is that people are still figuring out how to do things properly from end to end. And we have been talking here about drug-eluting stents. So now you need to couple mass diffusion to the mechanics of the stent itself. So as Stuart mentioned, the stents are covered with a drug, and when it gets into place, the drug percolates or diffuses into the tissue, and the objective of that drug is typically to prevent restenosis. Restenosis means more plaque depositing around the same location. So you just open up that artery. You would like to prevent it from closing again. But that is also another interesting development in the stent world. It is absorbable stents. So now these are not metal. They are made out of some kind of plastic type of material that with time deteriorates and eventually dissolves itself. And it's certainly possible to simulate all that, but it does require some very interesting possibilities at the material modeling level, where you need to model the progressive damage of material, progressive load carrying capacity disappearance. So I hope I gave you kind of a bird's eye view of what the analysts see in a stent, what they need to have it. Would you like me to give you at this point a rough description of what the living heart model does?
Absolutely. You definitely gave a bird's eye view on the whole process. I'm learning a lot of things. Every time I talk to you, I learn a lot of things. And the last topic that you talked about is very interesting to me. You said the destructible stent, right? The dissolvable stent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is fantastic that that the technology exists, but we also have the ability to simulate that the dissolvable stent. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm not going to say fortunately or unfortunately, I've been involved in the Living Heart Project for almost since the beginning. And I continue to play with it. But it's essentially, if you want to model a heart, I think Stuart alluded to it, there are multiple physics that need to be modeled there. So what makes a heart beat is essentially a collection of electric pulses that originate in the atrial node and propagate throughout the tissue of the heart. And as the electric signal propagates, then it activates certain fibers in the heart muscle tissue. Okay. So you need to model that. So you start by modeling the electrical part, and the electrical part is passed to the mechanical part. And in the mechanics, the tissue is a standard of an isotropic hyperelastic material. But now you need to model the activation itself, which is quite interesting because there are no external loads being applied there. Essentially, what you have is the fibers contract as a response to the electrical current that's passing through. Okay. So once you are able to model that, now the heart contraction, what's going to do is push, both suck in first blood and then push it out into the arterial system. So if you want to model that, you can either, if you are not particularly interested in the blood flow, you can model the thing very generically and as a 1D system, essentially cavities with volume and flow between cavities and so on. And that's actually how we model in the heart the whole arterial system. Because if you want to have the difficulty in the heart, it's the boundary conditions. What are the upstream and downstream pressures? And those are determined by the full circulatory system. So that is modeled in the process. But now if you want to look into more details of what's happening, like I'm seeing here, this an artificial valve, then it's important to have the fluid dynamics of what's happening there, opening the leaflets, pushing out the frame, and that would be done typically with the lattice Boltzmann type of approach or the particle type of approach to CFD, for the very good reason that once the valve leaflets close, essentially you cut off the flow. So traditional CFD is not particularly suited for these kind of problems. And fortunately, we have, in Simulia, at least 2 codes that are able to do the particle type of simulation. So you may ask, why do we want to model the heart? What's the purpose? And really, the purpose of the heart is to create the right boundary conditions for the problems that you want to solve. Again, as the example there, the artificial heart valve, or it could be to see what the load in the stent that has been implanted in the coronaries, which are right next to the heart wall itself, so they are pushed in and out a lot. But can be used too if you are a pacemaker manufacturer, you want to see what the loads on the leads are, and they can be mechanically quite complex. Or you can do things now, play upstream. What are the chemical reactions that produce the electrical pulses, and start studying what is the effect of certain drugs into the electrical performance of the heart. So there are all kinds of beautiful things you can do with this model, but for medical devices, is there essentially to provide the right loads and boundary conditions.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you. Stuart, do you have any thoughts on how medical device companies are starting to use more realistic boundary conditions like Nuno was talking about?
Oh yes, and I think that is the key, right? That's the whole reason behind virtual human modeling, is to get a better understanding of what the loads and boundary conditions are on devices that interact intimately with the human form. It's true of needles in the skin, it's true of stents in arteries, it's true of heart valves in the heart, it's true of hip implants and knee implants, etc., etc. The better we can understand and quantify the loads and boundary conditions on these devices, the better we can engineer them. And the better we can do it virtually, the less we are putting patients at risk. The last thing you want to do is put a device into the market that is improperly or incompletely validated, and then discover it's going to be exposed to a loading condition that just wasn't anticipated, or to a load that is far from what was expected, and discover that the device can't tolerate it. Yeah. So for sure, across the board, virtual human modeling is something that is being adopted at an ever-increasing rate. It takes you further than bench testing can, and doesn't put patients at risk in the same way as an actual clinical trial does.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you think about virtual human modeling, my impression was that it was to create a digital twin of the human model, including a digital twin of all the organs that we have. But maybe a near-term benefit, like both of you are talking about, is virtual human modeling can serve as a fantastic way to provide realistic boundary conditions for not just designing but also insertion of various medical devices into the human body. So very interesting. So I just wanted to end with just going back to the portfolio, the Simulia portfolio, which we have used, which we talked about throughout the entire hour. And we've talked about various aspects of Abaqus. Nuno, you talked about optimization, fatigue, and fluid flow. Stuart, what are your thoughts of, Simulia is not just sitting on an island. Simulia is now an integral part of 3D Experience platform. What are your thoughts on how Simulia, as part of the 3D Experience platform, adds value to a medical device a developer or an analyst?
Wow, it's a complex question, or should I say it's a simple question, it's a complex answer. Yes, Simulia is part of a broad family of capabilities within Dassault Systèmes, all represented on the 3D Experience platform. And the whole philosophy is one of integration. Integration in terms of business processes, and integration in terms of data space, and all to the end game of increasing value. Now, if I constrain myself just for a moment, though, to the idea of simulation on the platform, I have to think, I always think, and I have to think in terms of what you've already heard me say, capability maturity. And when we're working with customers, we work with them in that dimension, that primary dimension of capability maturity. What's the capability maturity that's required, that's going to deliver the value that is necessary? And capability maturity is made up of two dimensions: effectiveness, which I'll let Nuno talk to more in terms of accuracy, and dependability. You could use some other words as well. So effectiveness and efficiency. Simulation has to be efficiently deployable, efficiently usable. If an analyst is going to do a design space exploration, or look at how a specific stent performs in 100 different patients, it has to be efficiently done. He has to be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time with reasonable economics. And so effectiveness and efficiency coupled together. And what we work hard to do with customers is look at how we can leverage our portfolio of solvers, Abaqus being the preeminent solver, but we have a portfolio of solvers. How can we leverage them in a new environment like the 3D Experience platform to deliver that capability maturity that's necessary and do it in very sound economical ways? And that, of course, is really important because there's no point arguing the value of simulation if it's more expensive than alternatives. So that's really the way I look at the overall dynamic of simulation in our customers. That's how I try to assist our customers, is to find that most value-centric path for exploiting simulation and to do it in the best way. And that means efficiency and effectiveness in many respects.
Absolutely. Stuart, what you talked about, capability maturity, is very, very appropriate. That's you said it very well. So, gentlemen, we are coming to the top of the hour here. We talked about a lot of things, several examples. And as always, even though I know this world and the technology well, I feel like every time I talk to both of you, I learn a lot of new things. So thank you very much for enlightening me and the audience about some of the trends that we are seeing. But these trends are not just kind of wishy-washy things that are going to happen in the future. These are real things that are happening today, and how technology is able to help us model and simulate these changes. So it was quite interesting to me. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you very much, Nuno. Any final thoughts or comments from both of you?
My final comment would be, for all those customers, it's not a question of if you leverage simulation much more extensively, it's simply a question of when. And my advice would be, start planning now.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to add to that, at a much lower level than yours, that all this technology may seem daunting, but that's where you have people like the engineers at VS to help you out, sort out the difficulties that may come up there. And I'm pretty much assured that my former colleagues at Simulia will continue to work very hard to make the technology as easy to use as possible.
Very well said, both of you. Thank you very much once again for your time, Nuno, and thank you for your time, Stuart. It was quite enlightening. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.